Hi, my name is Christian Hood, and my project is on the Maya. So the Maya are the indigenous people of what was formerly known as Mesoamerica and what is now known as Central America and Mexico. So my project will be covering sort of a brief history of the people, digging in a little bit deeper towards sort of the colonization experience that they had, and talking a little bit about sort of the reconciliation occurring now. And then at the end, I'll sort of do a little bit of comparing and contrasting of the colonization of the Maya in comparison to the colonization of the indigenous people, so the First Nation people of Canada.
The Maya are indigenous people of what was originally known as Mesoamerica and what is commonly known today as Central America and Mexico. The Maya are known to have inhabited Mesoamerica as long ago as 2000 BC and in fact still live there today. Because the Maya have inhabited the earth for so long, they have gone through many transformations as a civilization and contributed towards the society that we live in today. As far back as the Archaic period, which was the dawn of their civilization, the Maya hunter-gatherer culture began to cultivate crops and domesticate animals. They then began establishing villages that included sacred buildings and temples. One of the main villages, Teotihuacan, grew into a metropolis that became an important religious center devoted to the worship of the great mother goddess and her consort to the plumed serpent. The plumed serpent god Kukulkan was the most popular deity among the Maya. Their civilization developed over thousands of years until they reached what is known as the El Tajin period. The El Tajin period, which is 250 to 900 CE, is also known as the Classic period in Mesoamerican and Mayan history. During this time, the Maya populations grew well into the millions, and they began constructing urban centers all across Mesoamerica. This period was the height of Mayan civilization, in which they contributed towards current astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and even the calendar. Before I continue and discuss the reasons for the decline of the Maya population in Mesoamerica, I decided I should discuss a few unique or particular things about the Maya. So during the height of the Mayan civilization, they used chocolate as a local currency. The Maya were the forefathers of tattoos, and the Maya participated in human sacrifices. Human sacrifices are obviously a very gruesome and brutal topic, but also a very interesting one. From the pre-Columbian era, human sacrifices were very common in Maya culture. The reasoning behind this ritual was due to the belief that it was an offering of nourishment to the gods. The sacrifice of a living creature was a powerful offering, and a human sacrifice was the ultimate one. There were several different ways these sacrifices occurred. The most common ways were decapitation and heart removal. Dedication to a new building or new ruler required a human sacrifice. Many of these were depicted in Maya artwork and sometimes took place after the victim was tortured. The person was painted blue and wore a headdress while being held down by 4 attendants representing the cardinal directions. The Nakam, or official, used a sacrificial knife to cut into the victim's chest and pull out the heart. So now that we have discussed the past, the culture, and a few interesting facts about the Maya, why don't we find out what actually happened to them and what occurred that caused the Maya's prominence to decline in Mesoamerica. The causes for the decline of the Maya are plenty, but the main cause was the amount of demands placed on their natural environment and resources. The Maya population had grown beyond the capacity that their land was able to provide. So overpopulation, along with drought and skirmishes for resources, led to the eventual decline and fleeing of their cities. The Maya people lost the complex social structure that supported their great civilization at its apex, which caused them to reform into sparse, small villages and towns. Introduce the Spanish conquest of the Americas. So when the Spanish had arrived in 1519, most of the large Mayan sites had already been all but abandoned for hundreds of years. The Spanish colonization of the Maya officially began in 1521, when Francisco de Montejo petitioned the King of Spain for the right to conquer the Yucatan. It took the Spanish 170 years and a number of expeditions to finally subjugate the Maya peoples, much longer than their campaigns against the Aztecs and Incas, for comparison. Aiding in the Spanish conquest was the introduction of European diseases, which decimated Mayan populations since they developed no immunity. The Spanish colonization entailed forced labor and mandatory conversion to Christianity. Those Maya who refused to give up their religious practices were arrested and tortured for heresy. Mayan artifacts were actively destroyed and all but a few of their sacred texts were burnt. However, in 1820, the colonies broke from Spain and the pressure for the Maya to abandon their culture was gone. Today, many of their descendants living throughout Central America still speak an evolved version of the Mayan language and have managed to retain some of the ancient Mayan cultural practices. So how does this compare to the colonization of the indigenous people in Canada? Okay, so as stated before, the Maya had lost a large part of their population due to their population growing beyond the capacity of which their environment could support. So not only that, but the 36-year-long Guatemalan Civil War left more than 200,000 people dead, 500,000 people driven from their homes, and at least 100,000 women were raped. So by the time the Spanish conquest had begun, and with that the colonization of the Maya had begun, there were only around 60,000 people remaining. It is estimated that the colonization of the Maya and disease contributed to 88% of the population being killed. When comparing this between the indigenous peoples of Canada, it is estimated that during the 19th century, there were 100 million First Nation peoples in Canada, and by the end of the 19th century, 99% of them were killed by colonization, smallpox, tuberculosis, residential schools, and many other factors. Today, there are around 6 million Mayan people living in Central America, and around 1 million First Nations living in Canada. The Mayan population attributes to 13% of the Central American population, and the Canadian Indigenous people account for 2.5% of the population. So how does this colonization compare to that of the Canadian Indigenous people? So comparing and contrasting, we have both cultures endured genocide. Both cultures endured an assimilation to Christianity, although a major difference here was that the implementation of residential schools in Canada. Both cultures lost their homes and their land. And both cultures, through assimilation and genocide, inherently lost their culture. So let's look at the effects of the colonization of the Maya people and see how they are combating it today. Maya communities have succeeded in preserving their identity and their ways. So some live by very traditional means and others have integrated into urban life, yet all in some way or another have adapted to modern lifestyles of the 21st century. This is partly because throughout their history, the Maya have been confined to a single unbroken area, including parts of southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and the western edges of Honduras and El Salvador. The Maya have managed to maintain many of the old ways in agriculture and trade, and like their ancestors, most Maya households engage in corn farming and many produce crafts such as woven textiles for sales in markets. The Maya have faced formidable challenges, some of which continue today, and the traits which have kept the Maya culturally and physically viable to date are their hold on their land, devotion to their communities, and deeply held system of belief. The importance of Maya culture is attracting more and more attention. Mayan language is now being taught in schools, and modern science is recognizing the value of traditional medicinal plant for their healing power and their potential in finding cures for diseases like cancer, diabetes, and AIDS. The Maya are having land returned to them that was once sacred. In these ways, the Maya are being invited to become more integrated into and recognized by modern society, and after half a century, civil wars have begun to cease. The modern Maya and researchers are working to overcome centuries of cultural suppression.
So I would just like to share with you some final thoughts I had after completing this project. Just viewing and comparing the colonization of both the Maya and the Indigenous people of Canada, we can see that they were both colonized by white European settlers who essentially were driven by Christianity and the crown and took their way of being and their way of life as being superior to that of the Maya and the First Nation people of Canada. and just implementing their way of life and completely assimilating a culture, right? So when you think about it like that, and I look at myself, I realize that I am of European descent and I am a white male in Canada, so I get to reap the benefits of basically that atrocity. So what we call that being privileged, right? So I just need to realize and understand that I am a privileged white male in Canada. I think we need to continue to attempt to reconcile what had happened in the past. And I think the first big step in doing that is for everybody to actually be able to acknowledge what has happened in the past, right? And as time goes on, we're getting a little bit closer to that as a country. But I think, yeah, the first thing that we need to do is everybody needs to acknowledge what had happened in the past, and then let's, try and move past that together. Come to some sort of an agreement and understanding between all of us, and then move forward as a country. Again, reconciliation doesn't really have a blueprint. There's not like a one way. That's what makes it difficult. There's not a one way to do it that sort of fixes everything. It's a slow process, and it takes time and thought and consideration. But first step, understanding and acknowledging what had happened in the past. Second step, I would say, is coming to some sort of an agreement. And then third step is actually implementing that plan. Anyway, my name is Christian. I'm happy you guys got to see my project, and I hope you liked it. Thank you.